There's a moment, and if you've been pulled over before, you know exactly what I'm talking about, where everything slows down a little. The lights in your mirror, the pull to the shoulder, the engine off, hands on the wheel, interior light on if it's dark. And then that particular kind of waiting while the officer walks up from behind. And somewhere in that waiting, a version of the conversation that's about to happen starts playing in your head. You'll be polite, you'll cooperate. If it's a minor thing, this will be over in 5 minutes. You've done nothing wrong, you have nothing to hide. And because you have nothing to hide, when the officer asks if they can take a look around the car, you say, sure, of course you do. Almost everybody does. And here's what I want you to understand by the end of this video. That yes, that automatic, well-meaning, I have nothing to hide yes, is a choice. A real choice made in about 2 seconds with real legal consequences that most drivers have never thought about. Not because they're uninformed people, because nobody ever explained what that yes actually does, what it removes, what it hands over, why it matters even when there's nothing in the car. That's what this video is about. I want to start with a specific scenario because abstract legal concepts are hard to care about. Concrete situations aren't. Imagine a guy, let's call him David, mid-30s. Nothing unusual about him. Drives a 4-year-old sedan, clean record, 12 years of driving. Gets pulled over on a highway for following too closely. Minor stop, the kind that should end with a warning. The officer is professional throughout. Checks David's license, runs the plates, everything comes back fine. And then, right as the energy of the stop starts to wind down, the question. You don't mind if I take a quick look in the car? David thinks about it for approximately 1 second. He has nothing to hide. He's driven this car every single day for 4 years. He knows what's in it. So he says, yeah, go ahead, no problem. And here is what David didn't know. He didn't have to say yes, not legally, not by any requirement attached to a routine traffic stop. The yes that came out of his mouth wasn't obligation, it was instinct, politeness, the path of least resistance in a moment of social pressure. And what followed from that yes, I'll get to in a moment. Let's talk about the actual law first, not in a dry way, in a way that you'll remember the next time you're sitting on the side of a road. The Fourth Amendment to the Constitution protects you from unreasonable searches and seizures. A vehicle search requires legal justification. There are a few ways that justification can exist. A warrant, signed by a judge, specific about what's being searched and why. Probable cause, a genuine, articulable belief based on observed facts that something specific will be found. Not a hunch, not a feeling, something the officer can point to and explain. A lawful arrest, where a search of the area around you may be permitted under specific circumstances. And then there's the fourth way, the one that doesn't require any of those things, your consent. If you say yes, the constitutional question largely disappears. The officer doesn't need a warrant, doesn't need to establish probable cause, doesn't need any prior justification at all. Your yes does all the legal work. And what's found through a consented search is, in most circumstances, cleanly obtained. Here's the flip side that most people don't know until they're on the wrong side of it. You can say no, lawfully, calmly, clearly. And the right to say no doesn't require an explanation and doesn't require suspicion to evaporate. Officer, I don't consent to searches. That's a complete sentence. It's legally sound. It preserves constitutional protections that your yes would remove. And it is not evidence of guilt, regardless of how the question was asked or how the silence after your answer feels. Let's be careful here for a second, because this is one of those areas where nuance matters more than simplicity. Saying no to a consent search does not guarantee no search occurs. Officers can search a vehicle when they establish probable cause independently. If a trained police dog is brought to the scene and alerts under circumstances that establish probable cause, that can provide legal basis for a search in many jurisdictions. And the specifics of that analysis vary significantly by location. A search incident to a lawful arrest follows different rules. Exigent circumstances exist. None of that changes the value of your non-consent. It just means your non-consent isn't a magic shield. It's a legal position. And legal positions matter because they determine what can and cannot be challenged afterward. When you consent, the search is largely unchallengeable. When you don't consent, and a search occurs anyway, the question of whether that search was legally justified becomes something a court can actually examine. That's the difference. That's why it matters. Now I want to spend some time on why saying no is so hard. Because knowing you can and actually doing it are genuinely different things, and I don't want to gloss over the gap. There's something that happens in these moments, in any moment where an authority figure makes a request, that researchers have studied pretty extensively. Most people comply at rates significantly higher than they'd predict about themselves beforehand. If you ask someone sitting at home right now, would you consent to a vehicle search if a police officer asked nicely? Most would say no. Of course not. Why would they? And then the moment comes, and they say sure. Not because they calculated it was in their interest, because the social pressure of the situation, the authority present, the momentum of compliance, the desire to not seem difficult, is enormous. And that pressure doesn't announce itself as pressure. It feels like being a reasonable, cooperative, decent person. The officers who ask for consent know this. Not necessarily in a calculating way. Often it's just the normal communication pattern of the interaction. But the ask is made knowing that most people say yes. Most people always have. The ask works because we're socially wired toward compliance with authority. It's a feature, not a flaw. It just needs to be overridden in this one specific context. And the override is simple. You just have to practice it enough that it comes out automatically when the moment arrives. Which is the whole point of this video. Here's the phrase again, because I want it in your head. Officer, I don't consent to searches. 5 words. And here's what I want you to notice about them. They're not hostile. They don't accuse anyone of anything. They don't suggest you have something to hide. They don't create a confrontation. They're simply a clear statement of a legal position. Say them out loud right now. Seriously, just say them. Notice that they don't feel aggressive when you actually say them. They feel like a person stating a preference clearly. That's what they are. The follow-up, if a search proceeds anyway. I'm not consenting to this search, but I won't physically resist. Both parts are important. The first creates a clear non-consent record. The second ensures safety and full compliance with lawful authority. Physical safety in the moment and legal questions about what follows, those are separate arenas. Keeping them separate is everything. Now let's talk about the different ways the consent request comes. Because if you're expecting one specific version and it arrives as something else, you might not recognize it. The direct ask, mind if I look around? Easy to identify. Most people know this is the consent question even without legal training. The announcement, I'm going to check the trunk real quick. Not framed as a question, framed as something about to happen. Many people interpret this as an already made decision and simply step aside. They've just consented through behavior without being asked a question. The benefit framing. If everything's clean, this is 2 minutes and you're on your way. Makes consent sound like it accelerates your evening. In practice, declining typically ends the stop just as well, and with your legal protections intact. The social framing. You don't have anything to worry about, so this won't be an issue, right? This one reframes the right to decline as suspicious behavior. But the right exists whether you're worried or not. Using it isn't unusual, it's simply informed. The quiet pressure, no formal question, just an officer moving toward the back of the car, hand moving toward the door handle, a kind of assumed permission. All 5 of these are variations on the same request. All 5 get the same response. Officer, I don't consent to searches. The framing of the ask doesn't modify your answer. That consistency is what makes the phrase actually work. Let's run through the complete practical sequence. Because knowing the principle is one thing. Having the behavior ready from the moment the lights appear, that's what actually helps. Lights in the mirror, hazards on, pull over safely, engine off, park, hands on the steering wheel, interior light on at night. And then, wait, don't reach for anything yet. Your documents will be requested. Wait for that. When the officer reaches your window, calm. Not performatively cooperative, not cold, just a regulated person. Do you know why I stopped you? No, officer, I'm not sure. Not a guess, not a suggested violation, just that. When documents are requested, provide them immediately. If reaching toward the glove box, announce it. My registration is in the glove box. I'm going to reach for it now. Slow, deliberate movement. Return hands to visible position when done. Questions about your activities, your evening, where you're coming from. I'd prefer not to answer questions about my activities. Once, calmly. The consent request in any form. Officer, I don't consent to searches. 5 words, said once. Not repeated defensively, not explained, not apologized for. If a search proceeds anyway, I'm not consenting to this search, but I won't physically resist. When the stop seems concluded but is extending, am I free to go, officer? If detained, I understand. I'd like to speak with an attorney before answering further questions. Now let's run some variations. Real situations look different from the standard scenario. What if the stop is going smoothly and the consent request comes when you're completely relaxed? That's actually the most common timing. The rapport has been established over several minutes. Things feel easy and normal. And then the request arrives in the same casual tone as everything that preceded it. The phrase doesn't change based on how relaxed you are. Officer, I don't consent to searches. The conversational context preceding it doesn't modify your response. What if the officer seems frustrated by your answer? The energy of the interaction may shift. Things may become more formal. That shift can feel uncomfortable, like you've done something wrong by answering the way you did. You haven't. A shift in the officer's demeanor is a social pressure, not a legal consequence. Maintain the same calm, the same politeness, the same clarity. Your position doesn't change based on the other person's reaction. What if you're the passenger and not the driver? You're legally part of the stop in most circumstances. You can be asked to step out. In stop and identify states, and these laws vary significantly across jurisdictions, you may need to provide identification if detained. Your approach mirrors the driver's. Hands visible. Don't volunteer information. Don't narrate the situation. If asked about the contents of the car or your activities, I'd prefer not to answer questions without an attorney present. What if they say they have probable cause and don't need consent? Possible. Probable cause is a real and legitimate legal basis for a vehicle search in many circumstances. The analysis is complex and jurisdiction specific. Your position stays the same. I'm not consenting to this search, but I won't physically resist. Why maintain that position if they've stated they have justification? Because whether actual probable cause existed is a legal question determined by courts, not by the roadside exchange. Your non-consent becomes part of the record. If the probable cause existed, the search proceeds legally, and your position doesn't change the outcome. If it didn't, your non-consent is significant. You're not adjudicating legal questions in that moment. You're creating the conditions for proper process to happen later. What if it's late at night and the location feels isolated? Hazards on, slow visibly. Drive at clearly reduced speed toward the nearest lit, populated area, gas station, convenience store, somewhere visible. Call 911 while moving. I've been pulled over and I'm driving toward a lit area for safety before stopping. Communicating the intention is the key, not just driving without explanation. What if there's a canine unit brought to the scene? A trained police dog alert can, in many circumstances and jurisdictions, provide legal basis for a vehicle search without consent. The specific legal analysis varies significantly. Your position remains consistent. State non-consent clearly. Don't physically resist or obstruct. Note the timeline, when the stop began, when the original purpose was addressed, when the canine arrived. That timeline can matter in a legal challenge if one is warranted. Document everything as soon as you're somewhere safe. Times, sequence of events, what was said. This information has real value in the hands of an attorney. Here's something I want to address directly, because it comes up every time this topic gets discussed. If I refuse a search when I have nothing to hide, doesn't that make me look like I'm hiding something? I understand the concern. The feeling is real. In the moment, declining feels like a statement about yourself. But think about this. Many people with legal training, attorneys, legal professionals who understand how evidence gets used, consistently decline consent searches as a standard practice. Not because they have something to hide, because they understand what consent legally means and what it removes. If declining consent suggested guilt, then the most legally informed people in the country would be constantly implicating themselves. They aren't. Declining consent suggests awareness. It's a constitutionally protected position, and it's one that courts understand, that legal professionals recognize, and that doesn't carry the suspicious inference that the social pressure of the moment makes it seem like it does. The discomfort is real, the implication isn't. Let me bring this home. Everything in this video traces back to one central idea. Consent to a search is a choice. Most drivers have never been told that, which means most drivers have been making that choice on autopilot, based on social pressure, instinct, and the desire to seem cooperative. Understanding it as a choice changes everything, not because you'll necessarily decline every time, but because you'll be making an informed decision rather than an automatic one. That's what an informed driver looks like in this situation. Not aggressive, not paranoid, not adversarial, just someone who understands what they're deciding when the question comes. Officer, I don't consent to searches. 5 words, practiced until automatic, available when needed. That's the whole thing, but here's what's been in the back of my mind throughout all of this. We talked about consent searches, where the question gets asked and you have a clear choice to make. That's one category of vehicle search. But what about the category where the question never gets asked at all, where a search proceeds, or something that functions like a search, based on a legal basis that was established before you had any say in it? Understanding how those situations arise, what creates the legal basis for them, and what a driver can and can't do in those circumstances, that's a completely different conversation. And it turns out to be one that most drivers are even less prepared for than the consent question. That's what comes next.